What's up, B2 Capital G here, talking about the new format in this video and how I think the game of Yu-Gi-Oh is finally going to slow down. I think that this is probably going to be one of the slowest formats that we've had in such a long time, and I could not be happier. I don't think that I've actually been this excited to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh in a very long time, maybe since like Duelist Alliance era, and this is something that I actually talked about quite some time ago. I made a video saying that the game of Yu-Gi-Oh was going to slow down. I thought that traps were going to come back. I thought that a lot of people were going to scale back on hand traps because I felt like hand traps weren't the real villains in the game. I felt like they were a quote-unquote necessary evil. We were really only running them out of necessity, and I did not expect it to happen this quickly. I'm not going to, beat on my chest and be like Cap G, the wizard, Cap G, the prophet, because obviously I've been wrong about a lot of stuff. I thought Maxi was going to 3. I was wrong about that, but I thought Monster Reborn was coming off the ban list, and I was right about that. So I'm not going to try and take too much credit, because if you would have asked me my honest opinion, I thought the game was going to slow down, but I thought it wasn't going to happen until probably around September, like November, somewhere after like Nationals, the fall. I didn't think Konami would do such drastic moves so quickly. So there are two major things with this ban list that I think Konami accomplished, and I think it's going to make the game a lot more kind of a slow control based pace, and that's what I really like. I remember the days of Duelist Alliance format, and I always talk about how Zexal was like my favorite era in Yu-Gi-Oh to actually play the game competitively, because in those formats you would have like a Yang Zing deck, and maybe you just started with like a random Yang Zing monster and face down defense, and you set like a Yang Zing path and another set card or something like that, like a Solemn Warning or a Book of Moon, and that was pretty much your first turn. Sertella Knights, maybe you normal summon Deneb, get out here, set Nova, set MST, and that was pretty much it. You didn't have these ridiculous hyper plays of Spiral and Pendulum Magicians. And one of the biggest problems that I had with these decks, and really with the decks that have these ridiculously absurd ceilings, is, and Farfa kind of alluded to this in one of his videos, I'm not exactly sure which one, he said that it kind of became, the format got so out of control that it almost seemed like you could sit both players down, right? You could see who was going to, go first and who was going to go second. And Yu-Gi-Oh, because of those two decks and how high the ceilings are, and the fact that you kind of want to be able to do your plays with your opponent having no cards on the field, you always chose first for the most part. You could kind of just look at your opponent's hand and you could say, do you have a hand trap? Because if you don't, here's my opening hand. I have quick fix, I've got double summon, and I've got this other random spot. Can we just go to game 2? Like, the game was so far out of whack where you could basically just show your opponent your opening hand. You could just show them those 3 cards, and it was basically game over at that point. You weren't going to stop me. All right, I'm going to do my ridiculous plays with Spiral. I'm going to get my Sleeper, my Double Helix, my, Tri-Gate Wizard. What exactly are you going to do to play through this? Pendulum Magicians were the same exact thing. In fact, I was even more infuriated with that deck. Not just because they have the pendulum summon, so they can summon 3-4 monsters at a time, but, Ash Blossom, and this is just the times that we live in, where it seems like every deck has to run Ash Blossom out of necessity. Ash Blossom isn't really that effective against it. They normal summon Joker, maybe you Ash it, okay, that's fine. They activate their skills, they pendulum summon, I think her name is Harmonizing Magician, and if that resolves, the duel is basically over. It really felt like, more so than at any time in Yu-Gi-Oh, or that I can remember, it felt like we were in a dice roll format, where if you went second and you didn't have the appropriate hand trap to stop your opponent, the duel was just over. And I'm so glad that Konami hit those 2 decks, because I don't think people understand this. Those are when decks have ceilings that high, where if you don't have a specific card to stop them turn 1, they just completely vomit all over the field and they make the uncrackable boards. Those are the cards that lead to us having these metas where people feel it necessary to run 10+ hand traps. If you just have regular decks, or like during Duelist Alliance era, we had some pretty strong decks like Shadows, even with Super Polymerization. We had Burning Abyss, we had Yang Zing, we got Cleefort after that. Did people have to run 8, 9, 10 hand traps? Like, no, you didn't really see that, because the ceilings of the deck were still fairly low. You weren't going to see Sertella Knights somehow summon like a Trevier turn 1 and set like 5 back row that made their board uncrackable. But the decks that we have now, the big 2, Spiral and Pendulum Magicians, they kind of did that. And I was actually dreading this format. I was at the point point where, you know, in my Ultra Guys deck, I was main decking shit like Spell Shattering Arrow, just because it's like, well, I know I'm not always going to go first. If I go first, obviously, you know, this Solemn Strike and this Bottomless Trap Hole, this Ultra Guys Protocol, these are all really good cards that can stop you. But if I go second and, you know, I don't have an Ash Blossom or a Ghost Ogre, you basically win the game. It's completely over. So the fact that Konami took those decks out, or at least severely crippled their ceiling, you know, severely limited what those decks can do, which I don't think that type of like spamming all over the board is ever healthy in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely makes the game a lot better. Like, that's a step in the right direction. But the second thing Konami did, and this is the really underrated thing about this ban list, the second thing that they did was they gave traps back to the players. One of the biggest issues about playing defense in Yu-Gi-Oh! I would probably say maybe over the last couple of years is we haven't really had that many options. I mean, doesn't it really feel like if you're playing a back row dot deck, if you're playing, you know, you're trying to play Trap Tricks, you're trying to play Paleo Frogs, doesn't it seem like kind of the only good traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now are basically like Solemn cards? I mean, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, those are awesome cards. If you open with those, you're almost always happy, and I'm not counting Evenly Matched because people don't really use that card as a trap. They mainly use it as kind of like an offensive spell for the most part, but it felt like those were kind of the only good traps. Like, there were other good cards that were solid, like Bottomless and Torrential Tributes, and, you know, Evac could see some, it could be like decent under certain situations, but all of those cards were limited, so it was never like you could reliably count on them. You were almost always more likely to open with a Solemn than you were with a Bottomless, unless you were specifically playing Trap Tricks where you could search it. Not only them giving us Torrential Tribute and Bottomless back, where we now have extremely viable options for when the opposing player wants to try and get out of line, but they gave us the king of the traps back. Solemn Judgment, in my opinion, is the ultimate risk reward card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because yes, it has the power to stop everything, but it also gives your opponent pretty much the power to OTK you with anything. There's almost every deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can do 4,000 damage, so I feel like the trap pool is getting exponentially better, and I think the biggest one out of those isn't even Solemn Judgment. The biggest thing that I actually like about this ban list, outside of Pendulum Magicians and Spiral getting severely roughed up, is honestly Torrential Tribute. A lot of people don't really give Torrential Tribute the respect that it deserves. People don't revere this card. You guys know how Mirror Force is like this, it's like this historic card. It's kind of like the godfather of Yu-Gi-Oh! Mirror Force has an impact in the game where people always kind of remember it when they're attacking with like 3-4 monsters. They're just like, what about that off chance he has the Mirror Force? Let me go ahead and throw this monster in defense mode. Obviously not so much for Link monsters, but you understand that mentality and how that's been ingrained into our brains ever since Mirror Force came out, and like, you know, Metal Raiders. Torrential Tribute honestly is the same type of stature of card. It's just been limited for such a long time that it's almost like a myth, very similar to Mirror Force, where people forget Mirror Force, or people forget TT even exists. And yeah, it's all fringe play during Zodiac format, but even then it was a card at limited status. And this is coming from someone who actually played when Torrential Tribute was at 2 back during the Zexal era. I don't know why they immediately limited it again, but it was actually one of the most fun things in the game, and it was actually a lot skillful too. One of the things that I like about Torrential Tribute at 3 is it feels like you always, I've said this before, it feels like you're always walking through a landmine. You don't know, should I commit that extra monster to the board? Because committing more monsters than you need on the board is infinitely punishable right now in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not just where we have Regeki and Dark Hole, but 3 Torrentials, and you don't even have to summon any more monsters. It can be a situation where you've got 3 monsters on board, you went first, now you're going to attack, even though maybe you didn't need those 3 monsters, you attack, I summon Battle Fader or something random, then I Torrential Tribute you, and you've been punished for overextending. You didn't even have to summon, I can summon. So I look at Torrential Tribute as a card, and I think it honestly warps the format, but it warps it in such a positive way where people are afraid to overextend. It actually punishes when people want to, you know, vomit more monsters on the field than they need. And I know I spent a lot of time being giddy over Torrential Tribute because I love that card so much, but it's not just that. I feel like Konami has given us even more disruption in the form of traps, because if you look at Artifact Morale Tag, that's a card that I associate immediately with Artifact Sanctum, and that's a card that you don't look at in a vacuum. You don't just think Morale Tag is a standalone card. You think of it in the context of the entire Artifact engine and artifacts being viable again, and now, you know, we could possibly be seeing Sanctums back into the meta where you can't blind MST back rows, and you can summon during your opponent's turn and blow up cards, and now Scythe becomes more viable because the artifacts as a whole are more viable. Konami also just addressed a lot of link spam in the game with things like Gofu. Dandelion was going to eventually be a problem. I personally thought that Lone Fire Blossom was going to get itself banned by the end of the year, but I think Dandelion is fine. Level Eater, another one, and Grinder Golem. I felt like they did so many things right on this ban list. They took out the decks that had the ridiculously high ceiling, Spiral and Pendulum Magician. They seriously crippled those decks. They took a lot of link spam out the game, and then they gave us they gave us more power to actually defend ourselves. So I feel like we should see a much slower format, and I actually think we'll be seeing a lot less hand traps. That's a topic for a different video, and I'll get into that a little more later, but I actually feel like we'll be seeing way less hand traps because I don't think the necessity is going to be there. So you guys let me know what you think, as always, in the comment section below, and do you guys agree with me? Do you guys agree that some of these powerful decks being taken out of the game and so many good traps being kind of put back into the game is going to lead to a slower format? Because believe me, there is nothing more that I want, I've been saying this for a while, than a slow format like Zexal, where you just kind of summon one monster, you set like 2 back row, and that's kind of it. You don't have to worry about, oh crap, I didn't open up with Droll and Lockbird, I guess my opponent just, wins the door or something like that. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, turn on that notification bell for daily videos.